Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to this video lesson. We're going to be talking about functions in C++. Well, the first thing that I want you to notice is that whenever you create a function, you have to start off with a function prototype. And a function prototype is kind of like a preview of what the function is going to look like. Notice that it is outside of the main function, right above it, and it's also below the include and using namespace std statement. So in this case, this first statement right here is indicating that I am going to create a function called findMin. It will not, it will return a whole number. That's what that int represents, an integer. And in terms of the arguments within the parentheses, you got to give this thing two integers. We're going to call it x parameter and y parameter. All right, so the name of the function, what does it return, and what arguments will be sent to it so that it can do its job. Now this next function that I'm going to create, this is a highlight, right? This is what we call function prototype, is called findMax. This is a void function, meaning this thing does not return anything. Once again, we see that within the parentheses, I have two integers that are going to be sent to findMax so that it can do its job. Now, getUserInput, this is a void function as well, which means it doesn't return anything. Notice within the parentheses, this thing has no arguments. So you call this function, it's going to do something, and in fact, it doesn't return anything. And then finally, we have getUserAge. Notice that the parentheses are empty, which means it has no arguments that are being sent to this function, but it's still going to return a whole number. So basically, you have four different possibilities. You have functions that return something and functions that don't return something. You have functions that have parameters, and you have functions that don't have parameters or any arguments that are sent to it to do its job. And so that's why I've created these four different functions. Now this is the functions prototype area, which means you are giving a highlight of what the function is going to do. Notice the semicolon at the end of each of the function prototypes. Typically what I do is I'll just simply copy this and I'll go down to the bottom of my main program. In fact, let me minimize that here. I'll go to the bottom of my main program and then I'll paste, and then I'll replace that semicolon with curly brackets. So I have the curly braces right here. Here it is, int findMin. Notice the inside of the parentheses is exactly the same as the function prototype. In essence, you're getting rid of the semicolon and adding the curly braces. So the job of findMin is to find the smaller of these two. So I just simply created a smaller of the two variable. I'm going to ask if x parameter is greater than y parameter, because if that's the case, then the smaller of these two is simply y parameter. Now notice that this function returns a whole number. So that's why we include the return keyword. So whichever ends up being the smaller of the two, x parameter or y parameter, we are going to return the smaller of either one of those. So if your function has something over here other than void, you better be returning something. Alright, so another example is the findMax. So let me minimize this guy over here. Here's the findMax function definition. So over here we indicate the prototype or the highlight view of the function. Here we actually define what it looks like underneath the main function. So findMax, again, we're going to give it two parameters, but this thing doesn't return anything. It's a void function. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to indicate if x parameter is larger than y parameter, I'm actually going to take care of the cout statement inside of my findMax. Notice that you don't see any return keyword because this function does not return anything. So whatever number happens to be bigger will indicate which one is the larger of the two. Alright, for the next function, getUserInput, notice that this one is a void function, doesn't return anything, and notice that it doesn't receive any parameters. Alright, so I'm going to ask the user to enter an integer, so where shall I put them? You'll notice back over here at the top of the program, I created two global variables. So a global variable means that it is visible by every single function. A local variable, such as over here, num1, num2, and minimum value inside of main cannot be seen by any of these other functions. These are only visible to the main function, whereas a global variable can be seen by main, findMin, findMax, getUserInput, and getUserAge. these guys are available to every single function. So that's why when the user enters integer 1 and integer 2, I put them into global num1, global num2. Now, by the way, I wouldn't normally call this global num1 or global num2. I wouldn't even put the word global in there. I'm just letting you know that these are global variables, so I decided to put the global prefix there just to indicate that everyone can see those particular variables because they are not local. All right. And then finally we have our last function, getUserAge, which returns an integer, and it doesn't receive any parameters. So I'm going to declare age. I'm going to ask how old you are. The user is going to input that, and then I just simply return whatever that value is. All right, so here are my 4 different functions. Now let's go ahead and expand main to show you what that looks like. I'm going to ask the user to enter num1 and num2. When I call function findMin, notice that findMin is going to be requiring 2 different parameters, and it will return an integer. So over here, I'm giving it its 2 parameters, and this thing is going to return an integer. I'm going to take that integer and assign it to min value. So I'm going to see out the smaller of num1 and num2. Well, that's just simply whatever the minimum value is. All right, when I call this function findMax, notice what findMax does. It requires 2 parameters, and it is not going to return anything. So from here, from findMax, when I call it, I give it the 2 integers. So findMax had better see out the smaller or the maximum of those 2, and sure enough, it does. It see outs the larger of either one of x parameter 1 or 2. All right, and then we have get user input. So when I call get user input, it goes from here to here, and it looks like I'm asking the user to enter num1 and num2, and then I'll indicate the smaller of those 2 by calling another function, findMin. Well, that's the function that I created up here. So can functions, like this guy, call another function? Yeah. Can functions call functions call functions? Absolutely. You can go as deep as you want. All right, then finally, I'm going to ask the user for their age. I'm going to get user age. Notice what get user age does. It doesn't require any parameters, but it does return an integer. So what this guy does is it returns the person's age, and we're going to take that and we're going to display that over here. And then finally, we're done with the program. So functions are a great tool to use to modularize your program. One person can be working on this function, another person can be working on this, so forth and so on. And then maybe you have your main designer, the guy who's the person who's the visionary, who could see the overall project working on the main function. And several different people can be working on this simultaneously, and collectively you can make a very powerful program in a small amount of time. All right, so this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. You have a good day. See you next time.